Hello everybody, Shinjo here, welcome back to the channel. I don't talk about Yu-Gi-Oh! Enough on this channel, so what I'm going to do today is list off my top 5 favorite modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Archetypes. I think I'm using that term correctly. So today I'm going to be discussing my top 5 favorite Yu-Gi-Oh! Decks of the modern era. Now, it was difficult for me to determine how recent I was going to include, but I figured just to give myself a good enough sample size that I would only include anything that has been introduced in the last 6 years. So for me, that benchmark was the start of 2018. I know I looked up what pack came out then, but I can't remember it offhand. While there may have been decks like Raid Raptors and Performapals that have gotten new support since then, they weren't introduced since then. And I think that's fair because even Dark Magician, Blue Eyes, Red Eyes are still getting new support to this day. So it allows me to highlight some decks that may not be talked about as much. Before I actually get into the top 5, there are 2 honorable mentions that I want to include. The Evil Twins or Live Twins and the Metamorph archetype. I hesitate to call them both decks because there really isn't a lot of support for both of them. But the Evil Twins and Live Twins are just really cool in that they're YouTube personalities, much like Iono is in Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. And the Metamorph archetype, I'm just a sucker for machine-based archetypes, and having one based around Joey and Bandit Keith's duel in Duelist Kingdom is really neat. But unfortunately, there hasn't been enough support to really warrant its own spot, at least in my opinion. At number 5, we have the Dream Mirror deck. And I feel like this may be the most obscure out of all of them, because I don't know how many people actually know this deck. It gives me vibes of a Chaos themed based deck with decks like Blackluster Soldier, Chaos Emperor Dragon, where you have these monsters that have 2 different sides. One's a dark and one's a light, and they have different effects to synergize and manipulate field spells and even fusion summon. It's honestly really unique and, in my opinion, an underrated deck. I don't know if it actually does well competitively, but it's still really cool to me. Number 4 is the Memento deck. Much like the Metamorph deck I discussed earlier, the Memento deck takes monsters from the old Yu-Gi-Oh! Era and gives them a fresh coat of paint with different effects, and I just think it's really unique that they have different effects where they're triggered by destruction, much like Yubel. Of course, the fact that they're based off of old Yu-Gi-Oh! Monsters doesn't necessarily hurt, especially the new Trihorn Dragon retrain, which I absolutely love. But at the same time, in the small periods that I've used it, it works really well. Number 3 is the Nouvelle deck. Much like how the Mementos literally revived old Yu-Gi-Oh! Monsters, the Nouvelles took a new spin on the random one-off warrior Hungry Burger and made it its own entire deck. In my opinion, it is a little bit broken to an extent since the effects can trigger whenever they're being attacked or targeted by an effect, but I'm sure there's ways to go around that. At the same time, the monsters just look so goofy and over the top in a way, and I just like how you can keep using the effects to keep on leveling up your monsters to eventually get into Hungry Burger for an OTK. At the end of the day, I applaud Konami for taking a deck that was seriously underdeveloped with Hungry Burger and give it a fresh coat of paint to make it competitive, even grossly to an extent. At the runner-up spot is the Shining Sarcophagus deck. This is really just based off of the fact that I like Little Yugi, in my opinion, one of the unsung heroes from the original series, and he just doesn't get enough credit, even though the Pharaoh did a lot of the work. But I just like how they took his monsters that he used in his last duel against the Tem and actually made them into their own effects. Again, much like the Mementos, much like the Metamorph deck, they're all based off of nostalgia, sure, but at the same time, they must be good because the base continuous spell card that's used for the deck is seriously expensive, and they wouldn't make a card like that be super expensive if it wasn't good, right? At the end of it all, it's a really unique concept, and the fact that they were able to take so many of Yugi's monsters like the Gadgets, Marshmallow, even Grandora, and make them into their own cohesive archetype is really cool. And considering that they were recently introduced, there's still more hope that cards could be revealed later to support other monsters that Yugi may have used. But there can only be one best modern Yu-Gi-Oh deck. And in my opinion, based off of what I've seen, that is the Malphys. Yes, I know, it's certainly an off-the-wall pick. It's not based off of nostalgia like a lot of the other entries, but I just like them. They're really cute, and they're the one side of how the Fluffle deck works without the darker undertones that the Edge Imps have. It's just a really cute deck, and while they are similar in the Nouvelles where their effects trigger when they're being attacked, they get different effects off of it that you can search from the graveyard, search from the deck, summon 2 monsters, go into Xyz plays, go into Synchro plays. I just like how a deck can have versatility with going into extra deck mechanics. Although at the same time, you could argue a lot of decks do, but just based off of the extra deck monsters specifically for the Malphys, they have different monsters that they could go into. They can defend with a card like Malphy Mommy, which benefits from multiple overlay units, or they could go in aggro style with Joyous Malphys and attack directly. And even their Synchro monster, Merry Malphys, can bounce cards, and I just like how the Malphys synergizes so well with an often forgot about card, Spring of Rebirth, where you get life points when the Malphys are bounced back. Even cards like Compulsory Evacuation Device work well with the deck because it can bounce the opponent's monsters back. Although my personal favorite is to go into as many Malphys as you want to swarm the field, and then Xyz for Ronin, Raccoon, Sandayu. That's just really cool because that gives you a powerhouse for the deck that can take the opponent's monster's attacks and use it against them. Not gonna lie, I was really close to having Yugi's Sarcophagus deck be number 1, but just based off of design alone, I don't think anything can beat the Malphys because they're just so darn cute. But those are my top 5 Yu-Gi-Oh! Decks. I know I switched between decks and archetypes. I think that still means the same thing overall, but I might just put one in the thumbnail and the title just to make things easier. If you enjoyed, hit that like button down below. Let me know what some of your favorite Yu-Gi-Oh! Archetypes were. And if you want to include decks that were from before 2018, you're more than welcome to do so. I just wanted to limit myself so I could talk about some unsung decks that honestly don't get as much attention. I'll see you next time. Momentai.